Hi everybody, this is for the summer program kids for summer 2017. I just told you I'd do another tutorial about dealing with the textures since we covered that at the end of the day yesterday, but everybody was a little groggy, so here we go. So what I'm talking about is this ground cover texture, the decking. I'll actually do another example of a paving texture around the pool. This one's done kind of by hand. But one of the things we can do is leverage photographic imagery in order to create textures. The trees and things we did by hand, the water, but like for the pool, actually used a photographic image of that with a filter applied to it. So first off, where do you get those things? Well, I've talked about a bunch of different sites. You have those links. This is one of my favorites, textures, www.textures.com. But there's also swtexture.com, this is architecture, there's flying architecture. Each of these has different types of materials. Most of these are kind of hard materials. They're intended for 3D modeling, but we can, as long as they're seamless and they're tiling, we can use them in Photoshop to create custom patterns. And if you just Google, for example, seamless tiling ground cover textures, you can find all kinds of things. Now, one of the things you have to be aware of is that not all these are actually seamless. So I downloaded this one a while ago, and if I come over here, there it is. I can tell whether this is seamless or not in Photoshop, and I can actually correct it by going to Filter and Other and Offset. Now, what this filter does is it allows me to offset the image up and down and left and right. And if you notice, the image itself, you don't see any seams in there. If I go back here, I'm going to pick one that, actually I haven't done this yet, but I'll pick one that I know probably isn't seamless. I'm just guessing maybe this one. So I will copy that image, open it in Photoshop, create a new document, and paste it in there. So if I go back to that filter, Other, Offset, well, that one's not too bad, but you can see based on this where that comes through there. All right, let's just try this. I want to make this a little more obvious. So let's go back and say ground cover textures. All right, so hope this one doesn't prove me wrong. I'm going to copy that, Photoshop, let's close that one. Let's do a new document. Take that clipboard size, and now let's go back up to Filter and Other and Offset. So there we go. Now you can see that when I offset it, basically it's taking the top and the bottom and it's wrapping around and putting them right here in the center. And it's taking the left and the right, it's wrapping them around and putting them right here. So if I tiled this image, it would end up having that seam in it. And that's very obvious whether you're working in 3D modeling or whether you're working in Photoshop. Now I could take the clone stamp tool and come in here and fix this. And that's one way you can take any image. There are a few different software programs out there that will do this automatically for you. But if you want to fix this manually, I could go in there and just make sure I repeat this edge of the flower over there. And until if you get rid of the seams that you can see, then the outside edges are going to work because it's basically wrapping it around and showing you what it would look like if you met the two sides and the top and the bottom together. So anyway, that's if you use the offset filter, you can see whether it's actually seamless or not. But there's lots of seamless images out there, so I would just keep looking until you find one that does work. Same thing, here's a hard surface image which is pretty clear. If I go to Filter, Other, Offset, I can move this around, and no matter where I move it, I don't see a seam coming up in there, so I know that's a seamless tiling image. All right, just close those down. Now, so that's sources. You can find them online. For those of you in the summer program, I've provided some of those images already, a few in the folder that you downloaded the other day. And I just want to go over the process of how do you bring those images into Photoshop and apply them within in this case, a plan rendering. But you could use these for section elevations and with the right modification, you can use them in perspective renderings as well, or photo montage work. So we've found a source, we've checked to make sure it's seamless, and now we're ready to put it in a document. One other step you might want to think about, however, is if you're doing kind of a hand rendering like this, I know it's kind of old school style with kind of marker, Prismacolor effects to it. You can certainly use photographic images of trees. One of the reasons I like this style is that the shading gives you a real sense of depth. And if you go to, let's see here. If you go to these style of photographic, kind of photorealistic images, when you get them, they don't really have shading. They're very even in terms of their tone. And when we're rendering a plan drawing, what we're trying to do is show depth in the plan drawing. Since it's inherently two-dimensional, that gives us a way to try and make things look like they're more three-dimensional, and there's actually an interaction of light and shade and shadow within the site plan. And by shading using a simple technique on these big, say, canopy trees, I can still understand and see what's underneath of them. If you apply those photographic tree images or computer rendered tree images, then you cover everything up and you can't really see what's happening underneath the overhead canopy. And in this case, that's important to me, so I'm using this technique. All right, so let's start with the deck. It's kind of a pattern based on 2x4s or 2x6s that are used there, and I could certainly draw this and render it, but it'd take a lot of time. So why not use something that's a lot quicker than that? So I'm going to switch now to the mode where I'm going to turn my color rendering off, and I have a basic color scheme where I've got some of these textures. And so there's a layer that deals with the decking. I've got it filled. I've got it right now filled as a color. And I'm going to create a new layer above that and call that decking texture. So I went through previously, for the summer program kids, we went through this and we set up our whole color scheme just with basic fill colors so that we can see whether our color scheme is working or not. Now I want to go back and add texture and detail. And the previous tutorial talked about how you shade the trees and create that depth. Now I'm going to talk about these flat surfaces that basically make up the ground plane. So once I get that done, I do have a JPEG over here, which I already got. If I look at the image size on it, it's 2x2. I have it the same resolution as my base image in the plan rendering, which is 150 pixels per inch. Now, if I just copy this, I've got it selected already. I'm going to copy that and paste it in there. You can see that it's kind of big, right? That doesn't really fit the scale of the deck. Now, there's a couple ways to do this. I can shrink this down in here, copy it, make another new document, create a pattern, and then I've got that pattern to fill. And that's perfectly legit. Well, let's just do that right now. So I'm going to use the Control-T to transform. Zoom in. Just going to kind of hold it under there and say, all right, maybe, I know it's a little pixelated. That's what Photoshop does. Click OK. So that's not too bad. That's getting me in the range that I want. And since it's on its own layer, I can simply do select all, copy. Then I'm going to do Control-N for a new document. And it remembers what's on the clipboard. So I'll say create, and then I'm just going to paste that in there. Now, once I have that done, in this new document, I can go up to my edit menu and choose define pattern. And I will call that deck horizontal. Okay, now that I have that texture defined, I'm going to come in here, select that, Control-A, just delete everything in there. And now I can start applying this in a couple different ways. I am going to start with the first way. I can come in here and use the pattern stamp tool and go down to the bottom, choose that last pattern, and I'm ready to start painting. Now, obviously I've got a big brush, and if I want to try to keep it within that pattern, I'd have to be really careful and work through that. But instead of doing that, I can move over here. Since I have that as a color layer, I'm just going to Control-click on that, and now I've just selected the entire area. I'm going to go back up to my decking texture, and I can paint this on. You'll notice up at the top I have a line check. That keeps this decking all at the same time. So I can just paint that on. Actually have decks up against the house here. And if you have some kind of irregular forms or whatever, that, you know, that works pretty well. I can also do that a little quicker by just simply going to Edit, Fill, choose the pattern, and, well, let me delete that first. So if I go to Edit, Fill, I pick the pattern from my list, and I just click OK, and it simply just fills that in there. Now, you can see in this case there are some seams, and therefore, if I wanted to fill that in, you know, I could be a little more careful with that pattern. I could get actually I'd probably just take the brush tool, make it a little smaller, pick up color, but ideally if you want to fix this, you use the offset command until you get this so there is no seam in it. Again, I loaded this from the internet. I could clone across there, but for what we're doing right here at the scale, when you zoom out, it's not really that noticeable. It's probably okay. Now, there's another way to do this. So if I go back to my decking, I remember this was kind of large. I am going to simply make a pattern out of this. I don't even know, you know, I don't care what size it is right now. I'm just going to make a pattern out of it. Let's call that large. So now if I come back to my original document, I am going to select this, Control A and delete, just to clear it out. Now in this case, I am going to just paste it onto that layer. Okay. All right, not sure why I'm not seeing that. Let's get rid of that one and make a new layer. All right, so I've got my original decking layer, call it decking texture. Let's make sure I actually copied it. All right, so select all, edit one layer, so I should be able to do copy. And come back here and do paste. There we go. I'm not sure why it didn't work the first time. So again, we've got the same issue here, but I can, instead of using this, I just define this as a pattern, right? So I can paste this and copy it. But what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to delete that, and I'm simply going to say Edit, Fill, make sure I get my last pattern, that one. Okay. So it's very big. You can see that it's really out of scale, and it just filled the entire layer. Now I'm going to do Control A and Control T, and I'm simply going to, with the Shift key held down, constrain that and pull that down until I get that about the right size. So again, I'm looking at the preview. Let's say, okay, that looks pretty good. Click OK. So now I've got it scaled down. I can just take this while it's selected and use the Move tool with the Alt key, and I'm just making copies of this until I cover all the deck areas. I think that's it. So I've got, oh no, got one more over here, right? So I'm going to Alt and just continue to drag that around until I've got all the deck areas covered over. And it's kind of messy because clearly it covers a lot of stuff that I don't need, and I missed a spot here, so I'm just going to Alt drag that down here. No, it's under the tree, so it's all right, it doesn't matter. All right, so I've got it all covered. Now, since I have decking material, actually I just pasted that in on the same layer. Okay, so I'm going to back up a little bit here. Step backward, step backward, step backward. Don't really want to put it on the same layer as the color. One more. One more. Okay, so this is my decking color layer. I think it would let me paste it in there. And now I'm going to take it up here and go Edit, Fill, Last Texture. There we go. So same process, Control T to transform, Shift, scale it down, move it in, zoom in on it until I can see, yeah, it looks pretty good. I like that. I'm going to click OK. Now I'm just going to do Control A for select all, and just going to let me keep making copies. So I've got all the deck area covered, and this time it's on the right layer. So I have the decking texture layer. So let's name that. And I have the decking solid color layer. Now, since I'm going to deselect that. Since I have this layer down here, what I can do is hold the Alt key down, and you'll notice that as I move right between those two layers, it's creating a clipping mask based on the layer below. So it's saying if you take the layer above and clip it based on what's in the layer below. When I do that, it trims that all out so that the only place I can see this texture is where the color was on that other layer. And just like a layer mask, that's a clipping called a clipping mask, it allows me to take this layer and edit it, move it around, change the scale, whatever I want to do, and it will still only display in the area that's defined by the color in the layer below it. And if I want to get rid of that, I just alt click again and it goes back to the way it was. So as I said, like a layer mask, it allows for non-destructive way of clipping an image, and it gives me an opportunity to take that image, I don't care what scale it is, make a pattern of it, paste it in, scale it visually till it fits right, and then just repeat it and clip it down by the other layer. And since I've already gone through the process of making a color scheme and putting solid color layers for every area in this document, I can always use that to create the clipping mask. All right, so it's Alt, click between the two layers, and then it trims it down there. So I can kind of do the same thing with the ground cover. So here's a ground cover layer. I'm going to make a new layer above that. Ground cover texture. And I have, let's see, I have this texture that I found at textures.com. I'm just going to make a pattern out of that. Edit, define pattern. Call that ground cover. It's actually an image of a forest canopy from above, but it'll work. Now I go back to my plan, go to fill, pick my ground cover texture that I just created. And once again, it's a little big, so I will do a Control T for transform. Zoom in. Yeah, that looks pretty good. So once I click OK, select all. Again, I can literally just move it back around and fill everything in. And then once I'm done, deselect it. Come back down here with the Alt key depressed between these two, and it clips it right into that area. Now that's still kind of photographic, and I don't really want it to look that way. This original image here was kind of it's so small you can't really tell whether it's photographic or not, and I don't believe it was in the first place. So now I'm going to go and apply a filter to that. So I'm going to go to Filter and Filter Gallery, and there's a number of that I use. This is a palette knife. I kind of like this in terms of creates the and you can adjust the stroke size. That makes it very coarse. I want this very fine. You can adjust the stroke detail, how much detail's in there. Click OK. Now the nice thing about this is that it's not seamless, so you can see those tiles when I was filtering it. Because the area is broken up in here, you can't really perceive that. However, if that's the case, you can now take this image, just draw a rectangle or a square in here, make it another pattern, ground cover, and now I could go back to my pattern stamp tool, uncheck aligned. Oh, sorry, it was using all the layers when I did that. I do not want that to happen. So let's go back here, and I don't really have a big area. So I will go through my layers and turn that off. And evergreen trees. Okay, so I got a little larger area up here, so let's use that to make a pattern. Wherever you've got a big enough area, it doesn't have to be big. So I will do that. Define pattern. Okay, now I'm going to turn everything back on. I'm still going to go to my ground cover texture layer, my pattern stamp tool. There we go. So now I can come in here, maybe a little smaller brush, since it's not aligned, and I can paint this on if I need to break that up, or if I see a seam somewhere, I just can paint that on. You can see how it's kind of changing. Any place where you see it being maybe too uniform, you can very quickly go through and create that randomness in there. So it creates a really interesting texture that's based on a photographic image, but it has a filter applied to it. So you can apply the filter before you make that texture or pattern and apply it, or you can apply it and apply the filter afterwards. So if you're touching it up like this, you end up having to create another pattern out of it anyway, but it gives a really quick way to fill large areas with texture and leverage your photographic library of textures and materials that you can use. Okay, so that's basically how you take any kind of texture and apply it to that surface. I thought I might do the paving, but I think I'll just stop it now. Same exact process. You take a paving pattern. We got this exposed aggregate. I can make a pattern out of it. Go back here. We'll get pool paving. Make a layer above it. Fill it with that pattern. Actually, in this case, I'm just going to fill it. Fill it with the aggregate pattern, and then do the transform. Maybe a little smaller. Control Alt to move. Applied that everywhere, and now I'm going to Alt click between those two layers, and it trims it to the pool. And in this case, since it's a little darker than I originally wanted, I'll just go back up to my image menu to adjustments, hue saturation, lighten it up a little bit, add a little saturation intensity to it. And if I want to adjust the colors at all, I can do that. So again, there's before, there's after, gives me the brightness that I was looking for, and now I have that nice little texture based on a real photograph of exposed aggregate paving. All right, so hopefully that'll help you with those major surface areas, the pool deck area, the wooden decking on the dock, the boardwalk, and the buildings, as well as the ground cover, which covers the area underneath the tree canopy.